When we hear the word military, our minds instantly go to combat, right? Defense, destruction, kind of the whole shebang. But what if I told you that the very institutions built for war are increasingly becoming our most vital forces for global aid and healing? Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're unpacking a really fascinating, almost totally counterintuitive paradox: military humanitarianism.
So, can an army truly be an instrument of peace? I mean, it sounds like a complete contradiction. For centuries, we've measured a nation's strength by its capacity to conquer. But today, well, true power might actually look entirely different. Let's explore why. Here is our roadmap for today. 1. The hard power paradox. 2. A brief history of aid. 3. The responsibility to protect. 4. India's peacekeeping journey. And finally, 5. Modern disaster relief operations.
Okay, Section 1. The hard power paradox.
There is actually a formal term for this whole concept. It's called military aid to the civil community, or MAC for short. It's essentially when unarmed military assistance is deployed specifically for disaster recovery. And this isn't just a fringe idea. It's actively baked into modern military doctrines all over the world. For example, Australia manages everything from local emergencies to massive recovery efforts right under this umbrella. Canada allows its provinces to call on the military for things like floods and forest fires. And over in Germany, the Bundeswehr relies heavily on MAC, running these incredibly extensive search and rescue networks during severe catastrophes.
Okay, let's dive into this and think about the traditional dichotomy. Hard power is all about deterrence, combat, and coercion. But soft power flips that script entirely, turning those exact same military structures into diplomatic lifelines. It's military humanitarianism in action. You see, the sheer logistical muscle of an army, we're talking heavy transport planes, mobile hospitals, the engineering corps, gives them a reach that civilian organizations simply cannot match. It's literally unmatched capability.
Moving on to Section 2. A brief history of aid.
Surprisingly, this isn't just some new 21st century idea. Even ancient strategists, like Sun Tzu and Kautilya, realized that showing compassion to a defeated enemy was actually a brilliant strategy to encourage surrender without a massive lethal fight. Fast forward a bit to 1819, and the Duke of Wellington recognized that his military surgeons were absolutely crucial to safeguarding his troops, which led to the very first military medical manuals. Then the real institutional shift started happening. Following the brutal horrors of the battlefield, the 1864 First Geneva Convention established protections for wounded soldiers. Later, the massive scale of captivity in World War I led to the 1929 Third Geneva Convention, which protected prisoners of war. And finally, after the staggering civilian casualties in World War II, the 1949 Geneva Conventions extended these protections to safeguard non-combatant civilians. That progression laid the absolute foundation for modern military humanitarianism.
Now, during the Cold War era, the nature of global crises kind of shifted heavily toward massive refugee camps. Organizations like the UNHCR quickly realized they desperately needed military logistics. I mean, they literally couldn't do it alone. So they formed these symbiotic partnerships with armed forces, because establishing civil administration and order for massive, sudden populations fleeing conflicts, that required military-grade site design and serious coordination.
Which brings us to Section 3, the responsibility to protect.
You know, there was a brief moment of optimism right after the Cold War ended, a real hope for a peaceful new world order. But the tragic, violent fragmentation of multi-ethnic states totally shattered that illusion. The failure of the international community to prevent mass atrocities and ethnic cleansing in the 1990s, most notably in places like Yugoslavia and Rwanda, forced a really profound rethinking of state sovereignty. Sovereignty can no longer just be this impenetrable shield against outside interference. It actually had to be viewed as a responsibility to protect one's own people.
So the crucial point is that this realization birthed the responsibility to protect, or R2P doctrine, which was endorsed at the 2005 UN World Summit. It rests on three main pillars. First, state responsibility. Basically, every state must protect its population from mass atrocities. Second, international assistance. The global community must help states do this. And third, and by far the most controversial one, timely and decisive action. Meaning, if a state manifestly fails to protect its citizens, the international community has a duty to act, up to and including military intervention.
But translating that doctrine into reality is incredibly fraught. In Libya back in 2011, an intervention meant to prevent atrocities evolved into regime change, sparking intense global debate about the doctrine's scope.
In Syria, despite overwhelming evidence of mass atrocities, deadlock in the UN Security Council prevented decisive international action. Over in Myanmar, entrenched state sovereignty hindered intervention to protect the Rohingya minority. And in South Sudan, operational constraints and state obstruction have really limited the effectiveness of the UN mission. These examples highlight the deep, very real complexities and limitations of global military intervention when geopolitical interests end up clashing with humanitarian needs.
Let's shift gears for Section 4, India's peacekeeping journey.
What makes India such a compelling case study for us today is exactly how it navigates those intense global frameworks we just discussed. Shaped by its colonial history and a strictly non-aligned foreign policy, India strongly favors diplomacy and regional capacity building over unilateral military intervention. They are highly protective of state sovereignty. But here is the really fascinating takeaway. Refusing unilateral intervention doesn't mean they step back from humanitarian action. Not at all. Instead, they use UN frameworks to project immense soft power on the global stage.
And this brilliantly illustrates their massive footprint over the decades. In the 1950s, during the Korean War, they deployed a highly respected medical unit and provided infantry for border monitoring during the Suez Crisis. By the 60s, during the UN operation in the Congo, Indian forces were in there providing high-intensity combat stabilization and critical aerial support. Into the 1980s, they sent military observers out to ensure fair elections in Namibia and monitor ceasefires between Iran and Iraq. And remarkably, by the 2000s, India deployed the UN's first-ever all-female formed police unit to Liberia. I mean, that set a totally new paradigm for women's empowerment in conflict zones. It's a real game-changer.
Section 5. Modern Disaster Relief Operations.
But before projecting all this power globally, they actually had to hone their capabilities at home. Decades of responding to massive domestic tragedies basically forced the Indian military to perfect its civil-military coordination under immense pressure. They managed incredible logistics for the 1971 Bangladesh refugee crisis. They executed rapid medical deployments during the horrific 1984 Bhopal gas disaster, and they were right at the forefront of relief and recovery during the brutal 1999 Odisha supercyclone, as well as the massive 2001 Gujarat earthquake.
This intense domestic experience triggered a fundamental modernization within their Ministry of Defense. The military effectively shifted from purely traditional security to a highly proactive humanitarian posture. They created integrated defense staffs and disaster management authorities, which officially hardwired civil-military coordination right into their government. This allowed the Army, Navy, and Air Force to launch joint operations seamlessly.
But let's be real, policy without hardware is really just an idea. To actually execute these missions globally, they invested heavily in strategic logistical hardware. We're talking massive heavy-lift transport aircraft, like the C-17 Globemaster and the C-130J Super Hercules, right alongside highly advanced naval expeditionary forces. This specific hardware is what allows a nation to project soft power across the globe instantly. It literally turns a military force into a massive flying relief agency at a moment's notice.
And as a result, the Indian armed forces have since become critical first responders to regional crises, like the devastating Nepal earthquake or the severe Jammu and Kashmir floods. In 2016, during Operation Sankat Mochan, they successfully evacuated over 150 stranded nationals from the active conflict zone in South Sudan. These aren't just isolated rescue missions, folks. They are the ultimate proof of our core paradox. Military logistics save lives when time is the absolutely most critical factor. Which brings us to a final thought. As global crises, both natural and man-made, continue to multiply, what does the future look like? Will the ultimate measure of a military's strength remain its capacity for war, or will it be its power to heal? We've seen how military infrastructure, originally designed for destruction, can be elegantly and